Richard Whitmore had everything: power, fortune, a glass mansion glittering above Central Park. But on Christmas Eve, his 17-year-old son looked him in the eyes and said, "I wish Mom had taken me instead of you." The words shattered more than silence. They shattered Richard himself. Outside, the city pulsed with holiday cheer. Bells chiming, snow drifting through golden streetlights. Inside the penthouse, the air was cold despite the fire. A 10-foot Christmas tree stood by the window, jeweled in ornaments no one cared to hang. Evan sat at the table, headphones in, ignoring the dinner his father's chef had prepared. At the far end of the room, Margaret Harris, the family's new black nanny, moved quietly, polishing a silver tray that was already spotless. Her eyes, deep and kind, lingered on the father and son, divided by grief and pride. Richard cleared his throat, his voice tight. "You could at least try to enjoy tonight." Evan didn't answer. He slipped away to his room, door closing like a verdict. The sound echoed through the mansion. For all his millions, Richard Whitmore had never felt poor, and in the quiet that followed, Margaret whispered a prayer under her breath, one that, before the snow melted, would summon a Christmas miracle neither man could imagine. Before the mansion turned into a cathedral of silence, the Whitmore home had once been alive with music and light. Richard's late wife, Amelia, was the melody that kept it beating. She decorated too early every December, hung mismatched ornaments, and sang Christmas carols off-key while baking gingerbread men that always burned around the edges. Evan, only 10 back then, would laugh until flour dusted his hair like snow. And Richard, always the man with a schedule, would pause at the doorway, pretending annoyance while secretly memorizing every sound. Those were the nights he forgot about stock prices and mergers. Those were the nights he felt human. Then came the winter that changed everything. A black ice road, a car too fast, a siren in the dark. Amelia's laughter was replaced by the low hum of machines, and before dawn, the doctor's eyes told Richard everything. She was gone. The funeral was grand because Richard didn't know how to do small things. Reporters crowded the gates. Friends whispered condolences that bounced off the marble like echoes in a museum. But when the lights dimmed, he found himself alone with a boy who no longer spoke and a home that smelled like flowers for the dead. Richard did what he'd always done. He built higher walls. He drowned in work, flying from city to city, collecting trophies of success that felt emptier each year. His son became another name on his assistant's schedule. When Christmas came, he replaced Amelia's warmth with a party list, her laughter with the sound of champagne corks. Evan retreated into silence. He stopped playing piano, stopped eating dinner with his father. At school, he learned how to disappear in a crowd. At home, he learned how to hate the sound of money counting itself in every corner of their glass palace. Every Christmas after that felt colder, even when the fireplaces roared. One year, Richard hosted a charity gala under a ceiling of golden lights. The guests praised his generosity, but upstairs, Evan sat alone in the dark, staring at a photo of his mother. Later that night, Richard found that photo torn in half, the father's face missing. From then on, he stopped trying to reach him. Years passed like snow melting on pavement, quiet, unnoticed. The boy grew taller, the father older, and between them stretched an invisible winter that no one dared to cross. When Margaret Harris arrived, it was not because Richard wanted help with his son, but because his housekeeper insisted the staff needed a gentle hand around the boy. She was in her early 50s, dark-skinned, graceful in a way that came from endurance. Her resume mentioned 20 years as a caregiver, nothing remarkable. What it didn't say was that she had buried her own child a decade ago, a boy about Evan's age. On her first morning, she noticed everything others ignored. The grand piano covered in dust, the untouched Christmas ornaments stacked in boxes, and the teenager's sketchbook filled with broken lines that never quite became faces. She didn't speak much, not yet. She simply observed the lonely man behind his glass desk, the angry boy behind his locked door. She saw pain wearing two different faces, but carrying the same silence, and as the first snow of December drifted past the windows, Margaret whispered a quiet promise into the stillness of that house. Lord, if there's still a way for them to find each other, let it be this Christmas. It was a prayer that would soon be answered, one small act of courage at a time. The first snow of December fell like powdered glass against the Whitmore mansion's windows. Inside, warmth flickered from 1,000 lights, yet the silence was heavy, polite, and endless. That morning, Margaret Harris found Evan sitting alone in the conservatory, sketching shadows on white paper. His headphones rested around his neck, silent. Outside, New York shimmered beneath a silver sky. She placed a steaming mug beside him. "Cocoa," she said gently, "with cinnamon. Your mother used to like it that way." The pencil stopped mid-line. His gray-blue eyes darted up, guarded but curious. No one had mentioned his mother in years, not even his father. "How do you know that?" he asked quietly. Margaret smiled faintly. "A home like this remembers things, even when people forget." He didn't answer, but he didn't push the mug away either. He sipped once, just enough to taste the warmth. That was how it began. From then on, their encounters became small rituals. A quiet breakfast before the staff arrived. Walks through the frosted garden where Margaret spoke softly about the meaning of Christmas, not as a holiday, but as a reminder. Love doesn't need wrapping paper, child. It needs presence. At first, Evan only rolled his eyes, but he kept showing up. One evening, Richard came home early from a business meeting. He stopped short at the sound of laughter, unfamiliar, fragile. Through the doorway, he saw Margaret teaching his son how to flip pancakes. Flour dusted the boy's sweater, and his laughter filled the kitchen like sunlight. Richard hesitated. "You'll ruin his appetite," he said dryly. Margaret didn't turn around. "Then at least he'll know what it means to be hungry. For something real." Her tone was calm, but it carried the weight of truth. Richard blinked, unsure whether to feel offended or grateful. That night, he stood by the Christmas tree, untouched since Amelia's death. Dust clung to the ornaments like ghosts of old holidays. He reached for one, a glass angel missing a wing, then stopped as Margaret entered. "I found this in the attic," she said softly. "Your wife and son made it years ago. Thought you'd want it back on the tree." He nodded slowly, the memory cutting deep. Together, they hung it near the top branch. Evan walked in mid-gesture, startled to see his father beside the tree. "You're decorating?" he muttered. Richard forced a smile, trying to. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. Then, Evan stepped forward. "You put that one too high," he said, adjusting the angel with trembling fingers. His hand brushed his father's, the first contact in years. Neither spoke, but something fragile shifted in the space between them. From that evening, the house began to change. Evan joined Margaret in the mornings to help bake cookies for the staff. Richard, though still distant, found himself listening more than speaking. Sometimes he'd pause outside the kitchen door just to hear their laughter, a sound that felt both foreign and achingly familiar. One Sunday, Margaret convinced them to attend the neighborhood tree lighting ceremony. Snow fell in soft spirals as the crowd sang carols, voices rising into the cold night air. Richard stood between his son and the nanny, their breath forming small clouds. For the first time in many winters, he didn't feel like an outsider in his own life, and when they returned home, Evan reached for the switch that lit their own tree, golden lights blooming across the glass walls. Margaret stood behind them, smiling quietly. She didn't need to say a word. Hope had found its way back into the Whitmore mansion. And though none of them knew it yet, that hope would soon be tested before the true Christmas miracle could finally arrive. For a few precious weeks, the Whitmore mansion felt alive again. The smell of cocoa and pine needles replaced the sterile scent of polish. Margaret's laughter warmed the marble halls, and Richard began to smile without realizing it. Even Evan, once buried in headphones, now joined the staff decorating cookies or hanging lights along the staircase. But peace, like snow on warm glass, never lasted long. It started with a headline: "Billionaire's new nanny seen as too close to the Whitmore family." The photo showed Margaret standing beside Richard outside a charity event, holding Evan's coat. The caption twisted it cruelly: "Widowed millionaire finds comfort and help from below the stairs." Richard read it at his desk that morning, his coffee turning cold. He slammed the paper shut just as his phone buzzed. Board members, investors, journalists all asking questions he didn't want to answer. When Evan came down for breakfast, he found his father pacing the kitchen, voice sharp. "I told you not to invite her to that event," Richard snapped. "She just came to help me," Evan shot back. "I asked her." "You don't understand how this looks. People are already talking." "Talking about what? That you actually have someone decent in your life?" "Enough!" Richard's voice cracked through the air like a whip. "She works for us, Evan. Don't forget that." Margaret, who had been standing by the sink, froze. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned off the tap. The warmth that had been growing in the house evaporated. Later that day, she quietly packed a few of her things into a small bag, unsure if she should leave or stay. But before she could decide, Richard appeared at the doorway, guilt already shadowing his face. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant, sir," she said gently, her voice steady but her eyes wet. "People will always see what they want to see. Doesn't mean we have to prove them right." That night, Evan refused to come down for dinner. Richard ate alone, the clatter of silverware echoing through the hollow rooms. The next morning, Margaret didn't sing while she worked. Even the lights on the Christmas tree seemed to dim. The tension reached its peak 3 days before Christmas. Evan had disappeared again. Skipped school, didn't answer calls. When Richard finally found him, the boy was at the skating rink downtown, watching other families laugh together. Snowflakes clung to his hair as he muttered, "You ruined it. She's the only person who made this house feel normal, and you ruined it." Richard tried to explain, but the words sounded false, even to him. "I was protecting her, and us." "From what? From kindness?" Evan's voice broke. "You're afraid of what people think, not of losing what actually matters." He stormed off, leaving Richard standing in the falling snow, surrounded by strangers whose laughter felt like knives. When he returned home that night, the mansion was dark. Margaret's room was empty, her cross necklace left folded on the bedside table. Richard sank into the nearest chair, the world suddenly too quiet again. Days passed. The house returned to its old rhythm, efficient, sterile, lifeless. Reporters eventually moved on to the next scandal, but the damage had been done. On Christmas Eve, Richard sat alone in his office, a single glass of wine in his hand. The snow outside had thickened, muffling the world in white silence. His phone buzzed again. Another message he ignored. Then his eyes caught something on his desk. A folded note written in Margaret's handwriting. "Sir, I never planned to change your life. I only wanted to remind you it was still yours to live. Love your boy. Not with things, but with time. That's the only gift that matters." For a long moment, Richard just stared at it, the words blurring as tears filled his eyes. Upstairs, he heard faint movement, the creak of the floorboards, the soft echo of piano keys. Evan. The boy was playing the same song Amelia used to love. Richard rose, heart pounding, and followed the sound down the hall. There, in the glow of the Christmas tree, his son sat alone, playing with trembling hands. A framed photo of his mother rested beside him, and beside the frame, the little glass angel still missing its wing. "Dad," Evan whispered, voice raw. "She's gone, isn't she? Margaret's not coming back?" Richard knelt beside him. "No," he said quietly. "She's not." Evan's fingers hovered over the keys. "Then maybe we should bring her back." Richard frowned. "What do you mean?" The boy looked up, eyes shining with something fierce, fragile, and new. "Let's find her. Tonight, before Christmas is over." Outside, the church bells began to ring, and the snow fell harder, blanketing New York in white. A father, a son, and a promise. All that remained before the Christmas miracle could begin. Christmas Eve. The city glittered beneath a curtain of snow, every window pulsing with warmth and music. Except one, the tall glass tower of the Whitmore mansion. Inside, Richard searched through the darkness, coat half-buttoned, heart pounding like a drum he hadn't felt in years. Evan stood beside him, a backpack slung over his shoulder. "I called the agency," the boy said. "They wouldn't tell me where she went. Said she left early this morning." "Did she leave an address?" Richard asked. "Just one line," Evan whispered, handing him a slip of paper. "Holy Grace Community Shelter." Margaret's church. Richard didn't think twice. Within minutes, father and son were in the car, headlights cutting through the blizzard as the city blurred past. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was heavy with urgency, with fear, with something like hope. When they arrived, the small church looked like a candle against the storm. Light flickering through stained glass, faint hymns echoing from inside. They pushed the doors open, cold wind sweeping in with them. There she was. Margaret knelt by the altar, sorting donated toys into neat piles. Her hands moved slowly, as if every doll and stuffed bear carried a blessing. Children from the shelter ran around her, laughing, their joy contrasting with the quiet ache in her eyes. When she looked up, surprise flickered across her face. "Mr. Whitmore?" she breathed. Richard stepped forward, his voice unsteady. "I shouldn't have said what I did, or what I didn't say. You were right about everything." She set down a toy, rising to meet his gaze. "You don't owe me anything, sir." "I do," he said firmly. "You showed me more truth than all the people I've paid to fix my life. You reminded me what I lost." Evan's voice broke between them. "We came to bring you home." Margaret looked at him, at the boy who once refused to speak. "Home?" she repeated softly. "I think you already found it." Snow drifted through a cracked window, the wind humming like a hymn. Richard took a breath, words trembling out. "Please, come back. The house isn't a home without you." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she shook her head gently. "I left not because of the gossip. I left because I needed you both to see what love costs and what it saves." Evan stepped closer, tears streaking his face. "You saved us. That's what love does." Her hand reached up, cupping his cheek the way a mother would. "No, child. Love only opens the door. You two had to walk through it yourselves." They stood there, the three of them, in the quiet glow of the church. Then Margaret turned to Richard, her expression softer now. "Do you know why I took this job, sir?" He shook his head. "My son," she said, voice catching. "He died 12 years ago. He would have been your boy's age now. Every Christmas I used to pray for a reason to believe again, that maybe God hadn't taken him without purpose. When I met you two, I understood. You were both lost, and I just wanted to help you find each other again." The confession hit Richard harder than any headline, any business failure, any grief he'd ever buried. He lowered his head, tears burning his eyes. "I don't deserve that kind of grace." "None of us do," she said gently, "but we still get it, especially on Christmas." For a long time, no one spoke. The church bells outside began to chime midnight. Christmas had arrived. Margaret turned to the children, gathering them near the piano. "Come on now. she said with a smile. Let's sing. Evan followed her, hesitating before sitting at the bench. His fingers hovered over the keys, uncertain. Then began to play the melody his mother once loved. It was clumsy at first, broken in rhythm, but Margaret joined in, humming the tune until the music filled every corner of the chapel. Richard stood at the back, watching, his vision blurring. The boy's hands moved with growing confidence, each note wrapping around the air like a prayer answered. When the final chord lingered, the church fell silent. Then applause broke out, small and sincere. Evan turned toward Margaret, smiling through tears. That was Mom's song. I know, she whispered. She must be proud. Richard approached them slowly, his voice barely above a breath. Thank you, Margaret, for reminding me what I still have. She squeezed his hand. Don't thank me, sir. Thank the one who sent you here tonight. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world felt cleaner somehow, brighter. When they stepped back into the cold, Richard looked at his son, who walked beside him without hesitation. For once, there was no distance, no wall, only warmth. As they reached the car, Evan glanced back toward the church. Margaret stood by the door, waving, her figure framed by light and falling snow. Dad, he said softly, can we bring her home, even just for Christmas Day? Richard smiled faintly. We'll see, he said. But something tells me she'll never really leave. At that moment, a small flake of snow landed on his coat, and instead of melting, it shimmered in the shape of a perfect crystal wing. Margaret saw it too and smiled knowingly. Looks like your angel's whole again, she whispered. That night, the Whitmore mansion glowed warmer than it ever had. Music filled the halls, laughter returned, and for the first time in years, the billionaire didn't feel empty. He finally understood. Wealth could build a house, but love, and a little Christmas grace, made it home. Christmas morning dawned with a quiet beauty. Snow blanketed the city like a soft promise, muffling every sound except the distant peal of church bells. Inside the Whitmore mansion, the world felt reborn. The tree glowed golden, its ornaments reflecting light across the marble floors. But what made the mansion truly different wasn't the decor. It was the laughter echoing through the halls. For the first time in years, it was real. Richard stood in the kitchen, clumsily flipping pancakes while Evan tried not to laugh. The air smelled of butter and coffee, and sunlight spilled through the tall windows, warming everything it touched. Those look burnt, Evan teased. They're caramelized, Richard replied, feigning confidence. Margaret entered then, cheeks flushed from the cold, holding a small gift wrapped in plain brown paper. You two started breakfast without supervision? She joked. Now that's a Christmas miracle in itself. Richard turned, surprise flickering across his face. You came. Couldn't stay away, she said softly. The Lord's work continues wherever hearts need mending, and I think you two are finally passing inspection. She handed him the package. Inside was a framed photo, one Margaret had secretly restored. Amelia's face smiled from it, surrounded by two smaller photos she'd printed from her phone, one of Richard and Evan decorating the tree, and one from the church the night before. Richard's throat tightened. How did you? Every family deserves to see what healing looks like, she said. Evan stepped closer, eyes glistening. We want you to stay, not just for today, for good. Margaret smiled, shaking her head gently. My place is where the Lord sends me, child. But I'll visit, and this time, you won't need a miracle to keep the peace. She looked around, at the glowing fire, the garlands, the framed memories. Seems like this house finally remembered how to breathe. Richard laughed softly, a sound half joy, half disbelief. You're the reason for that. No, sir, she said, resting a hand over his. You did this. You showed up. For a moment, silence filled the room. not the cold silence of before, but the sacred kind that hums between souls who understand each other. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window like slow-falling blessings. After breakfast, they bundled up and walked to Central Park. Families filled the pathways, children building snowmen, carolers singing, couples skating hand in hand. Richard and Evan joined in, awkward at first, then laughing freely as they slipped on the ice. Margaret watched from a nearby bench, her scarf fluttering in the wind, eyes shining. Evan skated toward her, holding out a small snowball shaped like a heart. "You taught me how to love again," he said quietly. Margaret chuckled. "Oh no, sweetheart, you just remembered." As evening fell, they returned home. The fireplace crackled, and the city glimmered beyond the windows like a sea of stars. Richard poured hot chocolate for all three, then raised his cup. "To Amelia," he said softly, "to second chances, and to the people who remind us what matters." They clinked their mugs. The warmth was more than physical. It was the warmth of belonging. Later, when night deepened, Margaret prepared to leave. At the doorway, Richard stopped her. "Before you go," he said, handing her a small velvet box. Inside was the glass angel, now whole, its missing wing replaced. "I had it repaired," he said. "Seemed right to fix what was broken." Margaret's eyes glistened. "So you finally learned the trick?" "What trick?" Richard asked, smiling. "The one you thought money could never buy," she said. "Love stays when pride leaves." With that, she hugged him, a long, forgiving embrace. Then she turned to Evan. "Keep your father company, young man. The world's quieter when he listens." Evan grinned. "I'll make sure he does." As Margaret stepped into the snowy night, the wind carried the faint sound of carolers nearby. Silent night, holy night. The melody wrapped around the mansion like a blessing. Inside, Richard and his son stood by the window, watching her figure disappear into the soft glow of the city. Evan leaned against his father, and for once, neither spoke. They didn't need to, because finally, after years of silence and sorrow, their home had found its voice again. A voice that whispered, "Love can't be bought, but it can be given. And when it is, it turns even the coldest winter into Christmas."